Hi class. Today I'm doing two mini lectures on sustainability in the food system. This is about thinking about the intergenerational ethics of our food system. How does the way our food system operate now affect the ability of future generations to access food and healthy food, and to do that in a way that has good capacity generation after generation. The market doesn't necessarily give us a sustainable food system. There are sustainability ethics that are also important. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to have this about sustainable food systems. This lecture is going to have two mini lectures, one about this concept generally about sustainability and how sustainability is measured. And the second one is sustainability in the food system, where we're also going to think about the Millennium Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, and they're linked to food. But first, kind of a broader introduction to issues about sustainability and why we think about it as sort of an ethical principle. The classic definition of sustainability or sustainable development was developed by the Brundtland Commission report. So this is the Commission on Sustainable Development from 1987 to the United Nations. And their definition is sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Okay, so there are components of this. There are needs, the present and the future. Okay, another way to think about sustainability is a situation in which both human and natural systems are able to survive and flourish in the very long-term future. So this is less about needs per se, and more about the systems that help us meet our needs. So there are two different things, and it says that we need both human and natural, where a sustainable development definition actually doesn't say how the future needs are met, but that future needs need to be met. So that's fairly similar to two concepts about sustainability called strong and weak, where weak sustainability is sustainable development that can be achieved by any combination of capitals, provided that the future generation can meet its own needs. This is pretty similar with this focus on needs to the Brundtland Commission. And that type of sustainability is about how it recognizes different ways that we can meet our needs into the future, drawing upon different types of resources, and I'll talk about the capitals in a minute, where strong sustainability is that future generations should be able to meet their own needs and have access to minimal amounts of natural capital to do so. So this recognizes the idea of needs, but also recognizes that there's something intrinsically important about natural capital. The natural capital is not fully substitutable for other types of capital. So the difference then is about this substitutability. How substitutable, how much can you trade off use more of one thing and less of another thing, is natural capital with other forms of capital. And we'll talk about the 5 capitals in a minute. Weak sustainability, on the other hand, accepts that there can be substitutability between natural and physical capital and other types of capital. Strong sustainability says the two are needed together, right? That there's complementarity. So just following up from that, here's our 5 in the middle. In the bottom part of this is 5 types of capital, which are often recognized. So think about natural capital. This is things like soil, water, air, our genetic resources, and the environmental services that are generated by the Earth's systems. So the Earth has a number of dynamic systems which work with these resources to produce environmental ecosystem goods and services that we value. There's also social capital, which are things like networks and social relations, affiliations, are kind of rights and duties. So these are things that I talked about under the kind of this area of how do we generate it, how do we guarantee ethics like rights and duties and reciprocity arrangements. Our human capital are the skills and knowledge and health that we all have. Physical capital are things like our infrastructure, our production systems, our technologies, and then economic and financial capital, things like cash and savings and other economic assets. These 5 capitals were developed and are the foundation of the Sustainable Livelihoods Framework, which at first was applied primarily in developing countries by organizations like the United Kingdom Department of International Development, but now has been used more broadly. So this is then think about weak sustainability. Says, how do you use these capitals and their systems to meet needs? And can there be recognizing that there is substitution between these different types of capitals? And weak sustainability would say that's okay as long as future needs can be met. Where strong sustainability says, yes, we need to meet future needs, our current and future needs, but we need to maintain the stock of natural capital as fundamental for human society and human survival. So how do we measure these things? If we think about weak sustainability, just are human needs being met? We have things like the Human Development Index and other indices which are listed here. Human Development Index is broadly used to look at how successfully societies meet the needs of their people in these 3 areas in their long and healthy life, being knowledgeable, and having a decent standard of living. So that's the Human Development Index is used to measure this progress within societies over time and then across societies. The leader in the world in the national level in 2018 was Norway, and Switzerland was number 2. That was similar to the state a few years before. Canada in 2018 was number 13. The United States was number 15, so quite similar to each other. China, I was surprised, was in number 85 in 2018. All of the lowest 19 in the world are all in Africa. Strong sustainability can be measured by things like ecological footprint or human footprint. I invite you to go to that URL to see more about the information which is provided there. The idea of ecological footprint is that we have these assets like cropland, grazing land, forest land, fishing grounds, built-up land, so things which the big assets of the planet which we use to satisfy our needs. We have the resources that we draw from those assets in terms of plant-based food and fiber, livestock and fish products, timber and other forest products, the space for urban infrastructure. So these are resources that are generated by these assets that we then use to meet our needs. The footprint then is essentially, measures the ecological assets that a population requires to produce the natural resources it consumes and to absorb its waste. So there's the natural resources that are required, right, to meet people's needs. What's the size of the ecological assets which are needed to exactly meet a society's needs? Biocapacity is about the productivity of those assets. So we can then measure these things in some common numerator, which we use as global hectares, which is a number of hectares will translate into a number of hectares in each country. Then we say a country that has, where its ecological footprint, so what does it need, how many resources it's producing, what how many resources is it consuming, and what's the ecological assets required to produce those resources versus the capacity that a society has with its ecological resources to ecological assets to produce natural resources. If the ecological footprint is greater than biocapacity, then we say there's an ecological deficit. If ecological footprint is less than the biocapacity, then we can say we still have an ecological reserve. We could still grow more at that type of consumption and have our footprint being less than capacity. So here's a picture of that ecological footprint. So we could think about, in the bottom are the ecological assets that produce natural resources in terms of energy, settlement, timber, and paper, food and fiber, and seafood. And those then are used to meet people's needs. That website that I indicated has this interesting cross-country data and cross-time. So we look at the upper corner, we see Canada in 1961 had a biocapacity per person of 26.3 global hectares. It had an ecological footprint of 7.6 global hectares. Therefore, it had biocapacity of minus the deficit, minus the ecological footprint of 18.7, had an ecological reserve, biocapacity reserve. Compare that to the case of 2016 in the lower left-hand frame is our ecological reserve shrunk from 18.7 to 7.4. So it's still positive, but shrinking fairly rapidly and shrinking really year after year. Interesting to compare that against the United States in the bottom right-hand corner here, that throughout the 1961 to 1916 period had an ecological deficit, so consuming more goods than it was could produce from its environment. Much lower biocapacity per person in the United States, so the land area fairly similar to Canada, but much, much larger population. But interestingly, its deficit has been decreasing since about 2005 over the last 10 years. Compared that to China with about even as of 1970, and then an ecological deficit since then, but somewhat of a turnaround since about 2011, somewhat reduction of its deficit during that time. Okay, so that's my, just to give you this kind of overview, and that this is ecological footprint. There's also human footprint that you can look for more evidence, say that we have more evidence about Alberta. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and then we'll move to the next mini lecture.